Chapter 37 continued. Part 2. For a few moments the men below just stood and stared and gaped. They simply couldn't believe their eyes. "Bless my soul!" cried the head of the fire department, going red in the face. "Really is a little boy, isn't it?" "Don't be frightened of us, please," James called out. "We are so glad to be here." "What about those others besides?" shouted the chief of police. "Are any of them dangerous?" "Of course they're not dangerous," James answered. "We're the nicest creatures in the world. Allow me to introduce them to you one by one, and then I'm sure you will believe me. My friends, this is the centipede, and let me make it known, he is so sweet and gentle that, although he's overgrown, the Queen of Spain again and again has summoned him by phone to babysit and sing and knit and be a chaperone. When nurse is off and all the royal children are all alone, small wonder, said the fireman, they're no longer on the throne. The earthworm, on the other hand, said James, beginning to expand, is great for digging up the land and making old soils newer. Moreover, you should understand, he would be absolutely grand for digging subway tunnels and making you a sewer. The earthworm blushed and beamed with pride. Miss Spider clapped and cheered and cried, could any words be truer? And the grasshopper, ladies and gents, is a boon in millions and millions of ways. You have only to ask him to give you a tune, and he plays and he plays and he plays. As a toy for your children, he's perfectly sweet. There's nothing so good in the shops. You've only to tickle the soles of his feet. And he hops and he hops and he hops and he hops. He can't be very fierce, explained the head of the cops. And now, without excuse, I'd like to introduce this charming glowworm, lover of simplicity. She is easy to install on your ceiling or your wall. And although this smacks a bit of eccentricity, it's really rather clever, for thereafter you will never have the slightest need for using electricity. At which no less than 52 policemen cried, if this is true, that creature will get some fabulous publicity. And here we have Miss Spider with a mile of thread inside her, who has personally requested me to say that she's never met Miss Muffet on her charming little tuffet. If she had, she'd not have frightened her away. Should her looks sometimes alarm you, then I don't think it would harm you to repeat at least 100 times a day, I must never kill a spider, I must only help and guide her and invite her into the nursery to play. The police all nodded slightly, and the fireman smiled politely, and about a dozen people cried, hooray! And here's my darling ladybug, so beautiful, so kind, my greatest comfort since this trip began. She has 400 children, and she's left them all behind, but they're coming on the next peach if they can. The cops cried, she's entrancing! All the firemen started dancing, and the crowds all started cheering to a man. And now the silkworm, James went on, whose silk would bear comparison with all the greatest silks there are in Rome and Philadelphia, if you would search the whole world through. From Paraguay to Timbuktu, I don't think you would find one bit of silk that could compare with it. Even the shops in Singapore don't have the stuff, and what is more, this silkworm had, I'll have you know, to honor, not so long ago, to spin and weave and sew and press, the Queen of England's wedding dress. And she's already made and sent a waistcoat for your president. Well, good for her, the cops cried out. And all at once a mighty shout went up around the Empire State. Let's get them down at once. Why wait? Chapter 38. 5 minutes later, they were all safely down, and James was excitedly telling a story to a group of flabbergasted officials. And suddenly, everyone who had ever come on top of the peach was a hero. They were all escorted to the steps of City Hall, where the mayor of New York made a speech of welcome. And while he was doing this, 100 steeplejacks, armed with ropes and ladders and pulleys, swarmed up to the top of the Empire State Building and lifted the giant peach off the spike and lowered it to the ground. Then the mayor shouted, we must now have a ticker-tape parade for our wonderful visitors. And so a procession was formed, and in the leading car, which was an enormous open limousine, sat James and all of his friends. Next came the peach itself. Men with cranes and hooks had quickly hoisted it onto a very large truck, and there it sat now, looking just as huge and proud and brave as ever. There was, of course, a bit of a hole in the bottom of it where the spike of the Empire State Building had gone in. But who cared about that? or indeed about the peach juice that was dripping out of it onto the street. Behind the peach, skidding about all over the place in the peach juice, came the mayor's limousine. And behind the mayor's limousine came about 20 other limousines carrying all the important people of the city. And the crowds went wild with excitement. They leaned out of the windows of the skyscrapers, cheering and yelling and screaming and clapping and throwing out bits of white paper and ticker tape. And James and his friends stood up in their car and waved back at them as they went by. Then a rather curious thing happened. The procession was moving slowly along Fifth Avenue when suddenly a girl in a red dress ran out from the crowd and shouted, "Oh, James, could I please just have a tiny taste of your marvelous peach?" "Help yourself," James shouted back. "Eat all you want. I won't keep it forever anyway." No sooner had he said this than about 50 other children exploded out of the crowd and came running onto the street. "Can we have some too?" they cried. "Of course you can," James answered. "Everyone can have some." The children jumped up onto the truck and swarmed like ants all over the giant peach, eating and eating to their heart's content. And as the news of what was happening spread quickly from street to street, more and more boys and girls came running from all directions to join the feast. Soon there was a trail of children a mile long, chasing after the peach as it was proceeded slowly up Fifth Avenue. Really, it was a fantastic sight. To some people, it looked as though the Pied Piper of Hamelin had suddenly descended upon New York, and to James, who had never dreamed that there could be so many children as this in the world, it was the most marvelous thing that had ever happened. Why do you think? Why do you think that was so marvelous for James? By the time the procession was over, the whole gigantic fruit had been completely eaten up, and only the big brown stone in the middle, licked clean and shiny by 10,000 eager little tongues, was left standing on the truck. Now, please, do not share a peach with 10,000 other people. But it's a story. Chapter 39. And thus the journey ended. But the travelers lived on. Every one of them became rich and successful in the new country. The centipede was made vice president in charge of sales and of a high-class firm of boot and shoe manufacturers. The earthworm, with his lovely pink skin, was employed by a company that made women's face creams to speak commercials on television. The silkworm and his spider, if they had been taught to make nylon thread instead of silk, set up a factory together and made robes for tightrope walkers. The glowworm became the light inside the torch on the Statue of Liberty, and thus saved a grateful city from having to pay a huge electricity bill every year. The old green grasshopper became a member of the New York Symphony Orchestra, where his playing was greatly admired. The ladybug, who had been haunted all her life by the fear that her house was on fire and her children were gone, married the head of the fire department and lived happily ever after. And as for the enormous peach stone, it was set up permanently in a place of honor in Central Park and became a famous monument. But it was not only a famous monument, it was also a famous house. And inside the famous house, there lived a famous person, James Henry Trotter himself. And all you had to do any day of the week was to go and knock upon the door, and the door would always be open to you. You would always be asked to come inside and see the famous room where James had first met his friends. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you would find the old green grasshopper in there as well, resting peacefully in a chair before the fire. Or perhaps it would be the ladybug who dropped in for a cup of tea and a gossip, or the centipede to show off a new batch of particularly elegant boots that he had just acquired. Every day of the week, hundreds and hundreds of children from far and near came pouring into the city to see the marvelous peach stone in the park. And James Henry Trotter, who once, if you remember, had been the saddest and loneliest little boy that you could find, now had all the friends and playmates in the world. And because so many of them were always begging to tell and tell again the story of his adventures on the peach, he thought it would be nice if one day he sat down and wrote a book. So he did, and that is what we have just finished reading. The end. Turn the page for a look at another scrumdiddlyumptious story from Roald Dahl. Oh, the twits.